Welcome, Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, asher kitshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. So, in this particular chapter, we are discussing the cities of refuge and defining what circumstances they would in fact operate, which has to do with the case of manslaughter. In other words, unintentional murder. So we're talking about the instruments that are being used that actually cause the death of that individual. And as the Torah defines them here, some basic legal considerations. And the truth of it is that it really has to be fully developed or further developed considerably by the oral tradition. But it's trying to sort of narrow down or try to help define better what can be considered intentional and unintentional. So, ve'im be'even yad asher yamut ba hikahu. If he struck him with a stone, and Evan Yad means possibly the side of it, right? So Rashi's going to actually say that. I'll go right into the Rashi here for a moment. He says, Be'evan Yad, sheyesh ba malo yad. In other words, we're talking about a stone that is large enough to fill a hand. We're not talking about a quarter-inch pebble here, but we're talking about something like a brick or a large stone. Asher yamut ba, with which a person can be killed. And we'll look at the Rashi once we get to the end of this sentence, and we'll go further with it. Hikahu, he hit him. Vayamut, and he consequently died. Rotzeahu, he's a murderer. Motu matay rotzeach. Such a person shall be put to death. In other words, the murderer shall be put to death, or shall surely be put to death. Motu mat. And again, what's the intention? That if he in fact took something that clearly would kill a person, right, and he intentionally smacked him with this, he smacked him. Didn't necessarily intend to kill him, I'm going to say, perhaps, but the point is he had something with which a person could be killed. At least I'm trying to raise some of the issues that emerge from this particular issue. Okay, so let's take a look. Asher yamutba, with which a person can be killed. Sheyesh ba shi'ur, in other words, it has enough of a size, lahamit, to kill. So here we go to mitnas ba biada he kemisat di yamutba. In other words, that's the amount with which a person can be killed, right? Mechahi means he smote him, v'katle, and he died. So let's get back into the Rashi here. Right. Lefi shenemar, because it says, and this is back in Exodus 21, v'hika ish et rehehu be'evan. There it simply says that a man smote his neighbor with a stone. V'lo natan ba shi'ur. And in that particular context, it didn't give the size of the stone. The size matters. Yachol koshehu. If we didn't have this statement here in Deuteronomy, in Numbers, excuse me, you might think that any size stone, that this would apply to. So here, right, lachach ne'emar, and for that reason it says asher yamutba. In other words, it has to be a large enough size that a person can be killed with it. And here, I believe we really are talking about mainly with your hand. In other words, if you took a stone and smacked someone, because we know that if you use a slingshot or something like that, the size of the stone can be considerably smaller, right? But again, if it's teeny, tiny, tiny little stone, it's quite possible that one wouldn't consider that to be something with which someone could get killed. Just some thoughts here. Or bechli eitz yad, or with a vessel, eitz yad of wood, right? And there's this statement, eitz yad. So we had even yad, excuse me. Okay, let's do this. But even yad, that's right. So we got kli eitz yad. Asher yamut. Again, remember, and Rashi mentioned this, that when it came to metal, it doesn't keep saying Asher yamut bo. hikahu, with which a person could be killed. Hikahu, he smacked him, vayamot, and he died. Rotzeahu, he is also a murderer. Motu mata rotzeach. Such a person has to face capital punishment. Take a look. Obichli eitz yad, right? The fishinemar, and again, because it states, V'ki yake ish et avdo o et amato, back in Exodus 21, it says, and if a man strikes his slave or his maidservant, beshevet, right, with a rod. Yachol, and it's possible, since it there doesn't say the size of it or anything like that. Yachol, it's possible we might interpret shehu kol shehu, right? We might think any size. If it's any size stick, lachach ne'emar. For this reason, it says be'etz regarding a wood, right? In other words, a toothpick isn't going to make it. A matchstick isn't going to make it. It has to be of sufficient size, right? Asher yamut bo. That's why it says here, with which a person might die. Sheyehebo kedei lahamit. There has to be of a size that can, in fact, kill someone. Let's take a look here, right? Okay. Goel Hadam, right? Now we're talking about the Blood Avenger. And we mentioned that this is likely to be a close relative, right? Who is affected deeply and emotionally by this death. He is the one who can put this murderer to death. You may want to check and make sure you're on mute, unless you want to ask a question. Obo, when he comes across him, he will kill him. Now, let's take a look at the Rashi. Befig Obo, when he comes across him, afilu betoch arei miklat. Okay, means even in one of the cities of refuge. So let's take it. Let's take this. Okay. So with what this means here is curious, right? Because he doesn't have a right to do it. We know he doesn't in a city of refuge. So let's just take another look at the sentence, right? Goel Hadam hu yami. So I think we're saying we're concerned that possibly he will kill him. Okay, again, please, I think you need to mute. Somebody needs to mute. Not sure. Let me double check. Okay, let me look a second. Look at something. Okay. Judith, I think no, everyone's muted. I don't know why this is happening. Everyone's muted, but for some reason we're getting these sounds here. I can't imagine why. Okay. Oh, Judith, it is you. I'm sorry, you're not muted. I just muted you. Sorry. Okay. Okay. Let's see. Let's just make sure. So it's possible that what the Torah means is that we are concerned here that the Blood Avenger should. This is not saying that he should, in fact, do it. We're saying if he should, and that's why Rashi says even in a city of refuge, right? So that's the concern. But if in fact, I believe it is, with hatred, in other words, full malice of intent, right? He pushes him. Or he shlich alav b'tztiya v'yamot. Or possibly tztiya. I'm trying to think. Let's take a look. We'll see what he means, right? Let's take a look at Rashi as what tztiya means. It means to hunt, essentially, right? Ketargumo bechimna, right? B'ma'arev means in a ambush. He ambushes him, right? That's essentially what he's talking about here, right? So if Hishlich alav b'tztiya, again talking about the Blood Avenger ambushing this person and killing him, or be'eva hikahu, right? Let's see. Okay. Again, eva is hatred. Hikahu, he killed him. just trying to say this, whether it's going on with the Blood Avenger here or whether it's talking about the murderer again. So we have to keep going just to get a sense of the context here. Is it talking, because here it's talking about the Blood Avenger, but here it could be talking about the murder. So let's just keep going and see. Or be'evahi kahu, or if he hit him in hatred, biyado, with his hand, and vayamot, and he killed. So no instrument in his hand. So I'm pretty certain we're talking back about the murderer here. Mot yumat hamakeh, the one who strikes shall be put to death, shall face capital punishment. Rotzeach, who he is a murderer. Again, Goel Hadam yamit et hayotzech bechi go. The blood avenger might kill him. I think I'm going to translate it that way when he meets him. Again, this is screaming for interpretation and for the way in which the oral tradition understands these statements, because we are not in any hurry, as I've mentioned before, to impose capital punishment. So so I think we're going in between. And if I'm not mistaken, my understanding is that if a court, in fact, does find this person guilty of murder, of intentional murder, right, then when it comes to imposing the death penalty, the one who actually has to do the execution may have to be the Goel Hadam. And I've always wondered to myself whether or not there's a sense that in asking that in demanding that of the Goel Hadam, and I'm not saying that the oral tradition actually insists on that. The whole idea of having a professional executioner is an interesting topic. Let's be honest about it. And so it may be saying that that the Goel Hadam might decide not to do it, that it becomes too awesome and awful for him to do it. On the other hand, again, sadly, people get used to killing if they do it a lot. Going back into this. Ve'im befeta belo eva hadafo. Here we have a different situation. If befeta sort of means suddenly, but I think here we could say accidentally. Belo eva, without any malice, hadafo, he pushed him, right? He caused his death. But literally means he's pushed him. Or he shlich alav, or he happened to throw, right, cast upon him, kol kli, any vessel, belotztia, without any intention, he wasn't waiting to do it, he wasn't hunting him. Tzad essentially means to hunt, right? So, and again, in one case, he came in physical contact with this person and caused his death. Another case, and the Torah wants to tell you, even if he doesn't come in physical contact with him, right? And here, befeta, he understands, but ones me again, forced, meaning literally that it was accidental. Something happened that forced the situation. Betargumo betachif, right? So again, he's saying, using the Aramaic, this word takif, shayasamuchlo, the idea is that he was close to this person. The one person was close to the other. V'lo hayalo shahud lehizaher halav. And so again, takif I would understand it as suddenly, right? As the way Rashi is understanding it. There was no opportunity to be careful, right? To take a precaution. This happened so quickly and without any, in a moment, without any possibility of this person taking a precaution not to kill him. And of course, we know that that's a very important issue in terms of determining intention, etc. Okay? Going on. B'chol even asher yamut ba, right? Or possibly this person killed the other person with some stone that was big enough to kill someone, right? That had that capacity, below re'ot, without seeing. In other words, he didn't know. He didn't see this person. Okay, re'ot, without seeing. We'll see again how Rashi understands it. vayapel alav, and this stone fell upon him, vayamot, and he died. Vahu lo oyev lo, and this other person who caused the death, he wasn't his enemy. We know he bore no enmity towards this person. V'lo mevakesh rato, he didn't seek any ill for him. There was no malice involved. That's important consideration, right? O bechol even asher yamut ba, right? Hikahu. Or so Rashi just fills in the words as if there's a word missing in the sentence. He hit him with this particular stone, right? But Laura would share Laura. In other words, you can tell that, in investigating this, he never saw him. Shelora, he didn't see him. Vayapol alav, or vayapel alav, it fell upon him. Mikan amru, and from this they said, the sages in Makot, tractate Makot, page 11, or right, I think, again, could be chapter 11, because there's no A or B side here. Amru, they said, ha'oreg derech yerida, right, that it was a downward motion, right, that the death occurred in a downward motion. Gula, he is to be exiled. He, in other words, can go to a city of refuge. Derech aliyah, okay, and but on the other hand, if he lifted up his hand to smack him and hit him, right, a nogula, he does not have that opportunity. And again, I believe that what they're saying here is the at least a legal assumption that there was some intention there. I believe. Now it's not clear here. It just simply says he is not exiled if he did it in an upward motion. And as I said, from all my previous studies, I understood this to mean that it was going to be the assumption, at least legally, at least at this point, was that he intended it, that there was some intention. In other words, because he began this, right? And again, okay, let's just keep going. The example that I think to myself is the axe head, right? So anyway, something like that. But it's not defined. Okay. Let's see. V'shaftu ha'ida, the community shall judge bein hamakeh, between the makeh, the one who struck, uvein Goel Hadam, and the one who's the blood avenger, al hamishpatim ha'ela, regarding these laws. So again, we see that the Torah here, the written Torah, leaves out a lot in terms of trying to actually adjudicate the case. And this is where we go to the oral law to go and further develop this so that it can be applied. The hitzilu ha'ida, and the community, in other words, it's talking about the tribunal, shall save him, right? They should save him. Et harotzech, this murderer, miyad Goel Hadam, from the actions of the blood avenger, literally from the hand of the blood avenger. So again, very often, hand represents power. Veheshivu et oto ha'ida, and the community should bring him back. They should return him el ir miklato, right, to his city of refuge, asher nas shama, to which he has fled, vayashav va, and he has to remain in the city, ad mot hakohen hagadol, until the death of the high priest. Again, interesting considerations here. I think primarily the idea that the Kohen Hagadol, that the high priest, that the death of the high priest acts as an atonement. Just a little bit more. Asher Mashach Oto, with who has been anointed, B'Shem HaKodesh, with the sacred oil, Okay. Ad mot hakohen hagadol, until the death of the high priest. Shehu ba lahashrot shechina b'Yisrael. Why? Because the high priest comes in order to cause the shechina, the divine presence, to alight upon Israel. laha'arich yemehem, in order to lengthen their days. V'harotzeach, however, the one who killed someone else, right? I mean, again, we understand the murderer does not necessarily mean with intention here. This word rotzeach, ba l'salech. He, on the other hand, came l'salech, to remove et hashchina Yisrael. Right? Murder is something where the divine presence it causes the divine presence to leave. Right? Umakatzer et yemei hachayim, and he shortened the days of life. Eino kidai. Right? It is, I think it could be a question, right? So it could be actually that this is simply a declarative statement that says this person is not worthy that he should be before the Kohen Gadol, the high priest. Again, the logic here we are trying to understand, but it's possible. That the fact that he is exiled, right? He is exiled to the city. It's going to say he cannot, if he leaves the boundaries of the city and the Blood Avenger comes upon him and kills him, the Blood Avenger is not guilty, is not considered guilty of murder, right? And that's also fascinating in its own way, saying, that we have to consider emotions very clearly, and to what degree we give emotions credence in a legal proceeding, right? But we know that that is obviously something, right? So that's one reason why he has to wait. In other words, he cannot come before the high priest. I think this is what the point that's being made. He is exiled to the city of refuge and consequently cannot come before the high priest for the reasons that are stated, that we just stated. Davar acher, another interpretation. The fishaya lo la kohen gadol, and the reason is that it was the responsibility for the high priest hitpalel, to pray shelo te'are takala zo Israel b'chayav, that such a misfortune, right, should befall the Jewish people in his lifetime. Interesting, right? That again, it's looking at the sentence from various points of view and saying here that the high priest is responsible, has a responsibility. If we wanted an example of the power of prayer of a worthy person, right, of someone who is responsible for the spiritual health of a community, and you can't think of anyone more responsible for the spiritual health of a community than the high priest. That is his task. So if he dies before this person, it has to do with that. So again, you can see that the sages are trying to deal with the whole concept and the connection here. Asher mashachoto b'shem el kodesh, who was anointed with the holy oil. The pshuto. So according to the simple meaning of this is min hamikraot haktsarim. We have to understand that this is an abbreviated passage, scriptural passage. Who haktsarim who shelo piresh, because he did not explain this passage doesn't explain mi meshcho. It doesn't say. It just says he anointed him. Asher mashachato, which he anointed him, and it doesn't say who anointed him. Ela kamo asher mashcho hamoshech oto b'shem hakodesh. So, but if we were to actually write this to give it the meaning that we're hoping it has, right? It says it's as if, right? Ela kamo. This sentence could read. You could put these words in Asher Meshacho HaMashech, with whom the anointer anointed him with the holy oil. The Rabbotenu Drashua, but our rabbis interpreted it, the Masech and Makot, in this tractate of Makot, the Ra'ayat Davar, right, as either a proof, something like that, right, of a matter, lelamed, to teach, she'im ad shelo nigmar dino, mate, kohen gadol, to teach you that if if the high priest died before the judicial process was completed, right, nigmar dino, until this judicial process of the murderer the high priest died before that was completed, umano acher tachtav, and they then appointed another Kohen Gadol in his place. Uleachar mikan nigmar dino, and after this point, after this second high priest had been set up, at that point his process ended. Chozer b'mitato shel sheno. He cannot go back until the death of the second one. Shne'emar, because of what it says here. Asher mashach oto, which it says, which he anointed. V'chi hu mashcho lakohen, right? But in fact, did he anoint the priest? Or hakohen mashach oto? Or did the high priest anoint him? Ela lahavi et hanimshach biyamav. But what it comes to do is to explain, to include the one who was anointed in his days, shemachaziro b'mitato, because in a sense, of course, the high priest sends him back to his community when he dies. So, and this is where we're going to stop today. So there are these fascinating elements to do with a situation of let's see, yeah, here we go. This is where we can start next time. And I'm going to stop the share for any comments you might have. Any thoughts? If not, I'll stop the recording. Yes, Mead, for the record. No comments?
Nothing for the record.
All right. Okay. Well, let me stop the record then. Okay. All right. Let's see.
Okay.